An alien queen bestows a human 3 wishes. His first choice stuns her completely. The light field snapped on before I even finished standing up. 1 second I was reaching for my survey kit, and the next I was pressed flat against the far wall of my own ship by a force I could not see, could not touch, and could not fight. My arms pinned, my boots lifted 2 inches off the deck. The air around me hummed like a power line in a rainstorm, and the smell, sharp, metallic, almost like hot copper, burned the back of my throat with every breath. 3 figures stood in the doorway of my shuttle. I say figures because calling them creatures felt wrong. Even then, they were too deliberate for that word, too precise. They moved the way a surgical instrument moves, with purpose so exact that every motion felt like it had been calculated before it happened. I am a geologist. My name is Colin Marsh. I am 34 years old. I am from Bristol, and up until about 11 seconds ago, the most dangerous thing I had faced on this survey mission was a stabilizer malfunction at 40,000 feet over a methane ocean. That was a bad morning. This was something else entirely. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward. It stood roughly 2.5 meters tall, built in a way that reminded me of a praying mantis. But the comparison falls apart the moment you look at the detail. The exoskeleton was layered like armor that had grown organically, each plate dark as polished obsidian, each edge precise as cut glass. The face had no eyes in any position I could recognize, but there were sensor clusters, 6 of them, arranged around the upper portion of the head, each one a deep amber that caught the light of my shuttle and reflected it back with something close to intelligence. The limbs were long, jointed in too many places, and the hands, if you could call them hands, had 5 extensions that moved independently of each other, like fingers that had never learned to stay still. It spoke. The sound it made was nothing close to language. It was a sequence of clicks, tones, and low resonant pulses that seemed to come from somewhere inside the chest cavity. A small drone, hovering at shoulder height beside it, translated. The voice that came from the drone was flat, genderless, and perfectly clear. You are a biological entity originating from System Sol, Planet 3. You have entered Vel-Sharon-controlled orbital space without registration, without diplomatic clearance, and without species documentation. You will be processed. Processed. I did not love that word. I came for my drone, I said. My voice was remarkably steady, considering. It drifted into your corridor. I did not know it was your corridor. I apologize. The translator drone whirred. The tall figure tilted its head approximately 12 degrees, which I later learned was the Vel-Sharan equivalent of studying something interesting under a microscope. Then it said something else, and the drone translated. Apology is not a recognized entry classification. You will be transported. They took my ship. They took my kit. They left me my clothes, which felt like an odd mercy, until I realized it was probably because they had no idea what clothes were, or why I was wearing them. The holding cell on their transport vessel was nothing like what I expected. There were no bars, no locks I could see. The entire forward wall of the room was a shimmering energy field that distorted the air beyond it like heat haze over summer asphalt. The floor was smooth and slightly warm. The ceiling gave off an ambient light that had no visible source. There was a platform along one wall at exactly the right height for a human to sit, which made me wonder, uncomfortably, whether they had measured me while I was being held against my own wall. I sat. I thought. I did what geologists do when they find themselves in a situation they do not understand. I started cataloging. I noted the construction material of the walls, which appeared to be neither metal nor composite, but something in between, with a faint crystalline grain to it when the light hit at an angle. I noted the temperature, which was slightly cool, around 18 degrees by feel. I noted the gravity, which was a touch heavier than Earth standard, enough to make my shoulders ache after a while. I noted the sound, which was almost nothing, a very faint vibration through the floor that told me we were moving. 3 days passed like that. Guards brought what I could only call food, a dense, gray-brown block that tasted like unsalted oats and smelled like mineral water, and a container of liquid that was slightly sweet and kept me functional. I ate it without complaint. When you are a geologist on deep survey, you learn very quickly not to be precious about food. On the morning of the 4th day, morning by my own internal clock, since the cell had no windows, The field on the forward wall dropped, and 2 guards appeared. The translator drone hovered between them. "You will be presented," it said. "To who?" I asked. "To the sovereign, Cyrith Voss, ruler of the Velsharan Compact, commander of the 7 systems, keeper of the deep record." I looked down at my field jacket, which had a coffee stain on the left sleeve from day 2 of my captivity. "Any chance I could change first?" I asked. The translator drone was silent for a moment that felt almost confused. "You will be presented," it repeated. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I told myself, quietly and firmly, that I was a representative of 8 billion people whether I liked it or not, and that the coffee stain was simply going to have to be part of the story. The throne room was enormous in a way that bypasses the word enormous entirely and requires a different vocabulary. It was not just large, it was scaled for awe. The ceiling was so high that the upper portions were lost in a soft atmospheric haze. The floor was a single continuous surface of the same dark crystalline material as the walls of my cell, polished until it reflected everything above it like a still lake. Along both sides of the central path, hundreds of Velsharan figures stood in absolute silence. Guards, courtiers, officials, I had no idea. Their amber sensor clusters all tracked me as I walked. The sound of my boots on that floor was the only sound in the entire space, and it echoed. At the far end, elevated on a structure that was not quite a throne, and not quite a dais but something that managed to be both at once, sat Cyrith Voss. She was larger than the guards, not by a dramatic margin, but by enough that it registered immediately. Where the others were dark, her exoskeleton had a quality to it that I can only describe as depth, layers of darkness with a faint iridescence underneath, like the inside of a shell. Her sensor clusters were a deeper amber, almost gold. She was perfectly still in the way that only very powerful things are still, not because they are calm, but because they have no need to move unless they choose to. She looked at me the way I have sometimes looked at a rock sample under a field lens, with interest, with patience, and with the comfortable certainty that whatever she was looking at was not going anywhere. The translator drone settled beside me. Cyrith Voss spoke. The sounds she made were more complex than the guards, more layered, with harmonics underneath the primary tone that I could feel in my chest rather than hear with my ears. "You are from a catalogued system," the drone translated, "but an unregistered species. You arrived without permission. By the laws of the Velsharan Compact, this places you under sovereign custody." "I understand," I said. "You are also," she continued, "the first confirmed biological intelligence from your world to enter Velsharan space. This places you under a different law, one older than the compact itself." I waited. The silence in that room was the heaviest silence I have ever stood inside. "You will be granted the right of magnanimity," she said. I did not know what that was. I said so. The translator drone was quiet for a moment, as though consulting something. Then, "It is the right of a sovereign, upon first contact with a new and uncharted species, to offer that species 3 wishes. It is a gesture of civilized power. It is a demonstration that the Velsharan do not merely conquer, they consider. 3 wishes. I stood in the throne room of an alien queen who commanded 7 star systems, with hundreds of her subjects watching me in complete silence, and she had just told me I could have 3 wishes. I felt the absurdity of it somewhere behind my sternum, pressing outward like a bubble. I kept my face neutral. I am good at keeping my face neutral. "I would like time to consider," I said. Cyrith Voss tilted her head. The same 12-degree angle as the guard in my shuttle. I was beginning to think it meant something specific. "You are given 1 standard rotation," the drone said. "Approximately 28 of your hours. You will be returned to your quarters." She looked at me for another long moment. Then she said something the drone translated quietly, as though it were an aside. "Every being offered the right asks within minutes. They always know what they want for themselves. It is interesting that you do not." I looked up at her, all 2.5 meters of her ancient, armored stillness. "I don't want anything for myself," I said. "That's the problem." She said nothing, but those gold-amber sensors stayed on me all the way until the guards turned me around and walked me back down that echoing floor, out of the throne room, and back to my quiet, warm cell. I sat on the platform, I pulled out the small notebook I always carry in my left breast pocket. Real paper, because electronics fail and paper does not. And I uncapped my pen. 28 hours. 3 wishes. The most powerful ruler I had ever encountered, commanding resources and technology so far beyond anything humanity had built that the comparison was almost meaningless. I wrote at the top of the page, "What does Earth actually need?" And then I started to think. Not about what I wanted, not about going home, or gold, or power. I thought about a planet with 8 billion people on it, most of them never knowing this conversation was happening, most of them never going to know. And I thought about what a geologist thinks about when he thinks about the future. He thinks in deep time. He thinks in millions of years, in tectonic plates and sediment layers, and the slow, patient work of forces larger than any single life. He thinks about what lasts, and what does not. I looked at my notebook. I looked at the blank page below the question. And then, slowly, I began to write. The 28 hours felt both too long and brutally short. For the first 6 hours I did nothing but write, scratch things out, and write again. The notebook page filled up until it looked less like planning and more like an argument with myself, which is accurate, because that is exactly what it was. I listed everything. I thought about every angle. I turned each idea over, like a sample in my hands, looking for the flaw in it, the crack that would make it worthless. Power for Earth? Short-sighted. Power can be built. Power can be discovered. Power is a direction, not a destination. A cure for something specific? Closer. But which disease? Which one do you choose when you are standing in front of a machine that can give you anything, and you only get 3 turns? Military technology? I crossed that out before I even finished writing it. I did not come to the most advanced civilization I had ever encountered to ask for a better weapon. That felt like going to the greatest library in existence and asking for a knife. I thought about what Cyrus Voss had said. Every being offered the right asks within minutes. They always know what they want for themselves. That was the key. Everyone asked for themselves. And I understood why. In that throne room, alone, small and uncertain, the most natural instinct in the world is self-preservation. Go home. Get rich. Get safe. Those are not bad instincts. Those are how living things survive. But I kept coming back to the notebook, and to the question I had written at the top. What does Earth actually need? Not what do I need? What does Earth need? By hour 8, I had 3 ideas I was not going to cross out. I looked at them for a long time. I read them in order. I rearranged them. I thought about how they would sound in that enormous room, translated through a drone, spoken to a being 3,000 years older than any institution on my planet. Would they sound small? Would they sound like a trick? Would she find them insulting, or amusing, or confusing? I decided I did not care, not because I was brave, but because the alternative, asking for something small, something personal, something that solved my problem and left 8 billion people exactly where they were, felt like a betrayal so complete that I could not live with it. Not even in a cell, not even 300 light years from home. By hour 12 I was done deciding. I spent the remaining 16 hours doing something that might seem strange given the circumstances. I slept. I ate the gray-brown block. I looked at the faint crystalline grain in the walls and thought about the geological processes that might produce a material like that. What pressures, what temperatures, what time frame. I let my mind rest in the comfortable, familiar territory of rock and time and deep, slow forces. When the guards came, I was ready. The walk back to the throne room felt different the second time. I was not scared the way I had been scared before. The fear was still there. I want to be honest about that, but it had settled into something quieter, something I could carry without it spilling. I noticed things I had not noticed on the first walk. The guards moved with a particular rhythm, always the same spacing between steps, always the same distance from me. The walls of the corridor had markings on them that I could not read, but that were clearly a script of some kind, dense and layered, covering nearly every surface. When the throne room doors opened ahead of me, the sound that came out was a low vibration, almost below hearing, that I felt in my back teeth. The court was assembled again, hundreds of Vel-Sharan in perfect stillness, every sensor cluster already oriented toward the door before I stepped through it. I walked the length of that floor. My boots sounded the same as before. I kept my chin level, and my hands easy at my sides, and I thought, this is the most important walk any human being has ever taken, and nobody on Earth will know it happened for a very long time. Sirith Voss was exactly as she had been. Still, deep, iridescent, enormous, and radiating a quality of attention so complete it was almost physical, like standing in direct sunlight. Her gold sensor clusters tracked me the entire way. I stopped at the position the guards indicated, approximately 15 meters from the base of the elevated structure. The translator drone settled beside me, hovering at my shoulder height. Sirith Voss spoke. "You have considered," the drone translated. "I have," I said. "You may proceed with your first wish." The court was silent. Not quiet, silent. There is a difference. Silence is the complete absence of sound, achieved not by accident, but by deliberate collective will. Every being in that room had chosen to make no sound at all, and the result was a stillness so profound that I could hear my own heartbeat. I took one breath. "My first wish," I said clearly, "is for the complete geological and atmospheric survey data for every uninhabited, prebiotic planet within Velsharan-controlled or catalogued space, and the formal right for humanity to peacefully settle those worlds, under Velsharan registration, with full legal recognition." The translator drone rendered my words into the click and tone language of the Velsharan. I watched it happen, watched the sounds leave the drone and travel across that enormous space. And then nothing happened. Not the nothing of a pause. The nothing of a system encountering input it does not know how to process. Sirith Voss did not move. The court did not move. The drone hovered in silence. 5 seconds passed. 10. I have stood on active fault lines and felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I have been in the cab of a drill vehicle when the ground cored out below me, and we dropped 4 meters in under a second. I have stood on the edge of a caldera and looked down into something that had no bottom. In all of those moments, the defining quality was the same, the feeling that reality had briefly stepped outside its own rules. That is what the silence in that throne room felt like. Sirith Voss moved. It was the first time I had seen her move with anything other than absolute economy. She leaned forward, just slightly, just enough, and the gold sensor clusters sharpened in a way I could not technically see but absolutely felt. When she spoke, the translator drone took a moment longer than usual to process. "You did not ask for freedom," it said. "You did not ask for passage home. You did not ask for wealth or protection or power." "No," I said. "You asked for worlds." "I asked for the right to have them," I said, peacefully. "Through your registration system. Legally. Not conquest. Settlement. There is a difference." The mandibles at the sides of her face moved. Slowly, deliberately. It was the first time I had seen that particular motion, and I did not know yet what it meant. "You asked for your species," she said. "Yes. Not for yourself." "I'm a geologist," I said. "I will be dead in 50 years. Give or take. The data you hold will still exist in 1,000 years. The worlds in your catalog have been sitting empty for longer than my civilization has existed. I need to think about which of those things matters more." Another silence. Shorter this time, but denser. "How many of your kind exist?" she asked. "Just under 8 billion, I said. The drone rendered the number. Something moved through the court then. Not sound, but a kind of collective adjustment, like a room full of people shifting their weight at the same moment. "And you did not ask for them to be protected," she said, "or fed, or given technology. You asked for land." "Land is all the other things," I said, "given time. That is what a geologist understands better than almost anyone. Give a world to people, and they will build everything else themselves. They always have." She was still for a long moment. Then she said something to a figure standing at the base of the structure to her left. A longer sequence, more complex, with a tone I had not heard her use before. The figure moved immediately, touching a surface panel that I had not noticed was there. The drone translated the exchange for me quietly. "She has instructed the archives to begin compilation. The data request is being processed." Sirith Voss looked back at me, and then she said something that the drone translated slowly, as though the translator itself was uncertain about the weight of the words. In 300 administrations of the rite of magnanimity, across 312 new species, no being has ever used their first wish for anyone other than themselves. No being, in the entire recorded history of this custom. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. You are aware, she continued, that the rite requires wishes to be granted in good faith. Whatever you ask, if it is within Velsharan capability, it will be given. I know, I said, and knowing that, knowing you could have asked for anything, you asked for worlds you will never live to see fully settled. The best time to plant a tree, I said, is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. My people have been saying that for centuries. We are very stubborn about it. One of the sensor clusters shifted. The motion was subtle, a slight reorientation, a change in the angle of focus. I did not know it yet, but I had spent enough time in that room by then to recognize, later, that it was the Velsharan equivalent of a very particular kind of surprise. Not the surprise of something unexpected, the surprise of something you did not know you were waiting for, suddenly arriving. The silence stretched, and in that silence, hundreds of alien beings in a room designed for awe all looked at one human man with a coffee stain on his jacket, standing on a floor that reflected everything perfectly, and not one of them made a sound. The data was already being compiled. The first wish was granted. You have 2 remaining, the drone said. I nodded. I was not done. I am aware, I said. I would like to continue. The court shifted again. That same collective adjustment, subtle and complete. I got the impression that people, beings, who attended these proceedings as entertainment, had stopped thinking of it as entertainment somewhere around the moment she said 312. I took another breath. My second wish, I said, is for a seat at the Velsharan Interstellar Compact. Not as a voting member, not as an equal power, and not as an ally. I am asking for an observer seat only. No vote, no authority, only the right to be present, and the right to speak when spoken to, or when something directly concerns humanity. The translator rendered it. The silence that followed was different from the first one. The first silence had been shock. This silence was something more like consideration, the sound of many minds working at the same time. Sirith Voss said, "You do not ask for equality." "We have not earned it," I said. "We have not been part of this community. We do not know your laws, your history, or your protocols. Asking for equal standing before we have demonstrated anything would be arrogant, and arrogance makes bad neighbors. Most species," she said, "when offered power, take it. Most species," I said, "when given too much power before they are ready for it, use it badly. I am not asking for power. I am asking for a chair in a room where decisions are made that will eventually affect my world, whether we are part of it or not. I would rather be at that table and say nothing for 100 years than be absent and discover, too late, that something was decided about us without us." The mandibles moved again, longer this time. "This is political reasoning of a sophisticated order," she said, through the drone. The tone had changed, just slightly. There was something in it that had not been there before, a quality I could not name yet, but that I felt along the back of my neck, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. "I spent 28 hours thinking," I said. I tried to be thorough. One of the court figures to the far left made a sound. Short, sharp, chitinous. I did not know what it meant. Several others near it made the same sound, in quick succession, and then stopped. The drone translated it, quietly, almost as an afterthought. "The court finds this response notable." I think that was as close as a Velsharan gets to laughter at something that surprises them pleasantly. "The second wish is granted," Sirith Voss said. "A formal observer classification will be established for the human species in the records of the compact. You will be registered as the species representative, pending official diplomatic contact." I breathed. In, out. "Thank you," I said. "You have one wish remaining," she said. And then, after a pause that felt deliberate, "I am curious what you will do with it." I could hear it now, underneath the translation, underneath the clicks and tones and the flat voice of the drone. She was curious. Genuinely curious. In a being who had administered this rite 300 times, and never been surprised once, That curiosity was the most extraordinary thing I had heard since they walked onto my ship. "I know what I'm going to ask for," I said. "I have known since the first hour." The sensor clusters sharpened again. "Then ask," she said. I straightened my jacket. The coffee stain caught the ambient light, faint and brown and completely irrelevant. "My third wish," I said, "is for one piece of medical technology. A single cellular regeneration sequence, something your people have had for at least 400 years, based on your documented history of life expectancy in the lower species, registers your archive provided to my cell's data screen, which I do not think you intended me to access, but which I read very carefully." The court stilled even further, which should not have been possible. "I am asking for the blueprint only," I continued. "No hardware, no delivery system, just the underlying biological principle, and enough data for human scientists to reverse engineer an application. It is the technology that, applied to human biology, would eliminate the majority of degenerative cellular disease. What you call the regeneration sequence, my people call cancer, organ failure, and 100 other names for the same fundamental process of cells breaking down in ways they should not." I let that sit for a moment. 312 species got golden passage home, I said. "I am asking for the thing that saves the most lives per byte of data. On Earth, the number of people who will benefit from that blueprint, if we can make it work, is not a small number. It is in the hundreds of millions, eventually, over time, in deep time." Cyrith Voss did not move for a very long moment, and then, for the first time since I had entered that room either time, she made a sound that was not translated. The drone stayed silent. The sound came from somewhere deep in her chest, a rapid, rhythmic clicking, layered, with a kind of warmth to it that I could not have explained scientifically but that felt, unmistakably, like a living thing expressing something it had not expected to feel. It took me a few seconds to understand that she was laughing. Not the polite, performed sound that powerful people make when something mildly amuses them. Something real, something that moved through her whole body and changed the quality of the stillness around her into something lighter and less formal, and completely, utterly unexpected. When it stopped, the throne room was so quiet that my own breathing felt loud. "Every being we have given the right to," she said, "has wished for themselves. You have wished for your entire species. Twice. And once for the people, your own kind, who will suffer from a condition you yourself may never personally face." I thought about my father. I did not say that, but I thought about it. "The third wish is granted," she said. Her voice, through the drone, was different now. The flatness had not disappeared, but something had shifted underneath it. "The cellular regeneration data will be compiled and delivered with the geological survey files." I exhaled. "Thank you," I said, genuinely. She looked at me for a long, measuring moment. "You are a very strange kind of creature, Colin Marsh," she said. My name in her voice, translated, sounded almost like a question. "I am not entirely certain what to do with you." "Most people feel that way," I said. The clicking sound came again, briefly, quieter, but real. And I stood there on that reflective floor, under that haze-lost ceiling, surrounded by hundreds of beings from a civilization so advanced that my world was a footnote in their archive, and I felt, for the first time since they had pinned me to the wall of my own shuttle, something very close to at ease. I should have been thinking about the logistics, the data files, the translation protocols, the process of somehow getting a hard drive full of alien geological surveys back to Earth in a way that would not get me quarantined or arrested, or disbelieved so thoroughly that the whole thing was useless. Instead, I was thinking about the laugh. The guards escorted me out of a side corridor after the third wish was granted, away from the main processional path, through a series of narrower passages I had not seen before. The walls here were less formal, still that same dark crystalline material, but without the inscription marks, without the careful finish. This was working space, functional and undecorated, and it made the whole structure feel less like a monument and more like a building that someone actually lived and worked inside every day. I was not taken to my cell. I was taken to a different room, smaller, without the energy field wall, with what looked like an actual door. The platform was wider. There was a second surface beside it at a different height, and on it were 2 containers of the sweet liquid and 1 of the gray-brown blocks. And also, unexpectedly, something else. A small, flat device, with a surface that was clearly a screen, dark and inactive. The guard indicated the room with a gesture I had come to read as, "Sit and wait." Then it left. The door did not lock audibly, but I was fairly confident it was locked. I sat. I looked at the screen device. I did not touch it. 40 minutes later, I kept time by counting, an old habit from cave surveys. The door opened, and Cyrith Voss walked in. She had to lower her head slightly to clear the doorframe. I stood up immediately, not because I had been told to, but because something in me that was older than thought stood me up before I had decided to. She gestured with one of her long upper limbs in a motion the translator drone, which entered behind her, rendered as, "That is unnecessary." I sat back down. She settled across from me with a kind of controlled grace, folding those long limbs in a way that brought her to roughly my eye level, which I suspected was deliberate. The drone hovered between us. "There are questions I wish to ask you," she said. "Outside the formal proceedings, this is not a continuation of the rite. This is a conversation." "All right," I said. "You mentioned the data screen in your cell, the archive access you read." "Yes," I said. "The display surface showed Velsharan medical lifespan records when I was trying to understand the environmental controls. I do not think it was meant to be accessible. I want to be clear that I am not pretending I stumbled on it by accident. I read it deliberately once I found it. I thought it might be useful." "It is not a concern," she said. "It tells me something about the way your mind works. You were given 28 hours in a cell, and you used them to read our archives rather than to despair. Despair does not help," I said. "Information does." "That is a significant statement," she said. "Simple and significant at the same time. Your species, are you all like this?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "No," I said. "We are very different from each other. Some of us are generous, and some of us are selfish. Some of us think in deep time, and many of us struggle to think past next week. We have done extraordinary things, and we have done terrible things, often at the same time, sometimes for the same reasons. And yet you chose to use the right for the whole rather than the part." "Someone had to," I said. "I was the one standing there." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I have administered this right 312 times. The beings who came before you ranged from highly advanced civilizations to pre-technological species who had been brought into contact with Velsharan space by accident or exploration. None of them asked for what you asked for. Many of them were brilliant. Some of them were from civilizations far older than yours." "What did they usually ask for?" I said. "Freedom and passage home were the most common first wish by a significant measure," she said. "After that, wealth, specific materials, energy sources, technology that could be traded. Several asked for weapons. 3 asked for information about specific rival species they were in conflict with. 1 asked for immortality for their personal line, which is outside Velsharan capability, and was declined." "What did they use their third wish for?" I asked. "The third wish," she said, "was almost always personal. Even the most altruistic beings, by the third wish, asked for something for themselves, a return home with guaranteed safety, a specific personal protection. One asked for a particular kind of flower from their home world, which we replicated from biological records." "That is not a bad wish," I said. "No," she agreed. "It is not. But you did not. Even your third wish, which is the most personal of the 3 in structure. The medical technology is something that could affect you directly, something your own body is susceptible to. You framed it in terms of hundreds of millions of others." I thought about my father again. He had died when I was 22. The disease had taken 3 years and been entirely without dignity, and there had been nothing anyone could do, because the technology to do anything simply did not exist on Earth. I had thought about him in the cell. I had thought about him when I wrote the third wish in my notebook. I had not written his name down. I did not need to. The wish contained him without naming him, the way deep rock contains the record of a long-ago rain, without anyone having been there to watch it fall. "My father," I said, and then stopped. Cyrith Voss waited. She was, I noticed, extraordinarily patient. 3,000 years of practice, probably. My father died of one of the conditions the regeneration sequence would treat, I said, when I was young. So it is not entirely selfless. Nothing ever is, completely. But the version of it that is selfish is also the version that helps everyone, and that seemed like the right direction to pull. The translator rendered this. Cyrith Voss was still for a moment. I am sorry for the loss, she said. The drone's flat voice made it sound strange, but the intent behind it was not strange at all. Thank you, I said. She leaned forward slightly. I want to ask you about the second wish, the observer seat. You said arrogance makes bad neighbors. It does, I said. Most species, when they enter Velcheron space for the first time and survive long enough to speak to me, are terrified. The ones who ask for power are terrified and overcompensating. The ones who ask for weapons are terrified and calculating. You did not seem terrified. I was terrified, I said. I am still somewhat terrified, but I am a geologist. I have spent my career studying things that are billions of years old. It makes it harder to take yourself too seriously. The universe was here long before me, and will be here long after, and most of what feels urgent in the moment turns out to be a very thin layer in the sediment record. The sensor clusters shifted, that reorientation I had come to recognize. Tell me about your world, she said, not as a command, as a genuine question. So I did. I talked for a long time. I told her about Earth the way a geologist tells it, not in terms of politics or history or human achievement, but in terms of the planet itself, the tectonic drama of it, the continent collision that built the Himalayas, the slow movement of the plates, the volcanic hotspot chains, the deep ocean trenches. I told her about the variety of it, desert and ice sheet and rainforest and open ocean, all on one relatively small world, producing an extraordinary pressure on everything that lived there to adapt rapidly and constantly. Your species evolved on a geologically active world, she said, when I paused. Yes, I said. That is not common. Most registered species originate on worlds with significantly lower tectonic activity. It produces different behavioral patterns. Well, what patterns? I asked. Stability seeking, she said. Species from stable worlds tend to build deep structures, long institutions, slow decision-making, strong preference for the known. Species from geologically active worlds tend toward adaptability, faster decision cycles, higher tolerance for uncertainty. We do not tolerate uncertainty, I said. We just push into it anyway, because the alternative is worse. The clicking sound again. Brief. Yes, she said. That is a precise distinction. We talked for another hour. She asked about Earth's history with space exploration, how far we had reached, what we had found, what we were looking for. I answered honestly, including the parts that were not flattering, our false starts, our political arguments over funding, the long gaps between programs, the fact that when I left for this survey mission, there were serious academic debates happening on Earth about whether deep space exploration was even worth the cost. She listened to all of it without interrupting. You are a young species, she said finally. By Velcheron measure, extremely young. Your recorded history covers a span we would consider recent. I know, I said. And yet the thinking you demonstrated today is not the thinking of a young species. I considered this. I think, I said slowly, that the thinking itself is not what is young or old. The infrastructure is young. The institutions are young. The technology is very young. But the capacity to think past your own life, past your own comfort, past your own immediate survival, that might not have anything to do with how long a species has existed. It might just be a choice some individuals make, and some do not. Cyrith Voss was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that feels like it contains more than silence. Then she said, I have decided to do something that is not part of the rite. I waited. In addition to the 3 granted wishes, I am going to give you something that exists outside the protocol. It is not a wish, it is a recognition. I do not understand, I said. The Velcheron Compact uses a biological encoding system for diplomatic designations, she said, an emissary mark. It is administered once and registered permanently in the diplomatic archive. Any Velcheron scanner, anywhere in the Compact's territory, will read it and know its meaning. She leaned forward and extended one of the long limbs toward me. The secondary set, lower and more precise, with the 5 independently moving extensions. She held it near my left wrist, not touching. The drone translated her next words carefully. The mark means, "This being speaks for a species worth listening to." It grants safe passage in Velsharan space. It grants the right to initiate communication with any Velsharan official. It places your world under the formal notice of the compact, meaning no Velsharan vessel may act against your world without the explicit authorization of the sovereign. My voice was not entirely steady when I spoke. I want to be honest about that. Why? I asked. She answered simply, because in 3,000 years and 312 administrations of the right of magnanimity, you are the first being who ever made me feel that the custom was working as it was intended. The encoding was brief. A faint warmth at my wrist, a pulse of something I could not describe exactly, and then it was done. No visible mark, no pain, just the faint sense of something having changed in a way I could not see. She straightened. She spoke one more time before rising. Your survey drone has been retrieved and placed in your shuttle. Your shuttle has been moved to the primary departure corridor. The data files, all 3 wish compilations, are being transferred to a storage unit compatible with your ship's systems. You will be escorted to departure by a diplomatic honor guard, not a security detail. The distinction matters in our protocol. I understand, I said. Colin Marsh, she said, through the drone, and there was that quality again, my name, as something closer to a question than a statement. When your world becomes ready for formal contact, and based on what you have demonstrated today, I believe it will, the compact will be listening. I stood. I thought about extending a hand, then thought about how meaningless that gesture would be to her. Instead, I did something I had not planned, something that came from somewhere instinctive and unscripted. I pressed my right hand flat against my chest, over my heart, and held it there for a moment. I did not know if she recognized the gesture, but she watched it, and something in the position of her sensor clusters shifted to an angle I had not seen before. Then she rose, cleared the doorframe with a slight bow of her head, and was gone. The honor guard came 10 minutes later, 6 figures, moving in the precise synchronized rhythm I had come to recognize, but without any of the cold efficiency of the security escort. The lead figure gestured me forward in a motion the drone rendered as, "When you are ready." I picked up my notebook. I put it back in my breast pocket, the pen clipped alongside it. I thought, nobody on Earth knows this happened. Nobody is waiting for me with understanding of what is in these files. I am going to go home and try to explain to an entire civilization that they have land rights on 1,000 uninhabited worlds, a chair in the oldest political body in this region of the galaxy, and a medical blueprint that will take decades to work through, but could change the shape of human suffering permanently. And they are going to ask me how I got all that. And I am going to say, I thought about my father, and I thought about deep time, and I asked for the right things. And some of them will believe me. The honor guard walked me through corridors I had not seen before, wide and high, with the inscription-covered walls and the faint vibration underfoot that told me the ship, the station, whatever it was a living, working thing, not a monument. Through viewports I saw stars, the kind of stars you only see when you are truly far from home, familiar constellations pulled into unrecognizable shapes by the distance. My shuttle was exactly as I had left it, minus the coffee I had knocked over on day 2 of captivity, and plus a storage unit the size of a large briefcase secured to the deck beside my seat. My survey kit was back in its rack, my instruments were where I had left them, and in the recovery dock beside the forward port, exactly where it should have been, was my drone, intact, undamaged, the sample housing still sealed, the atmospheric data from the methane ocean still logged in its memory. I sat in my pilot's seat. I ran system checks. Everything responded. The departure corridor was open ahead of me, a long, clear path back to open space. I looked at the storage unit on the floor. Survey data for 1,000 worlds. A seat at the table of galactic civilization. A medical blueprint for something that had taken my father at 53 years old, in a hospital room in Bristol, on a gray November morning, while I sat in a plastic chair and held his hand and wished, very hard, that there was something I could do. There had not been anything I could do, not then. But I had been standing in the right room, on the right day, and someone had told me I could have 3 wishes, and I had thought very carefully about what those words actually meant. I engaged the drive. The shuttle lifted, turned, and moved forward through the corridor, out into the dark and the stars, and the long quiet distance between here and home. In the recovery dock behind me, the drone's indicator light blinked green, sample secured, survey complete, all systems nominal. I had come out here for a rock sample and an atmospheric reading. I had the rock sample. I had the atmospheric reading. I also had, secured on the floor in a briefcase-sized unit, the equivalent of a new chapter in the human story, quietly assembled, legally registered, ready for whenever my species was ready to open it. I set the autopilot for the relay point that would get me back to human comm range. Then I took out my notebook, turned to a fresh page, and started writing up my notes. A geologist always writes up the notes. Whatever else has happened, the record has to be clear. I wrote the date, I wrote the coordinates, I wrote a brief summary of the encounter. And at the bottom I wrote, samples retrieved, data secured, survey objectives met. Then I looked at the stars for a while, thinking about time, how much of it there was, how patient it was, how it held everything that had ever happened, and everything that was going to happen in the same vast, unrushed continuum, without urgency, without preference, without any awareness at all of the small human shuttle making its way home through the dark. I was fine with that. I had always been fine with that. It was one of the things I liked most about my job. The stars did not care. The time did not care. The rock did not care. What mattered was what you chose to do in the thin, bright sliver of it that belonged to you. I had done what I could. That, for now, was enough.